All right, welcome everyone to episode 2 of the Next Gen podcast. Thank you so much for everyone's support for episode 1. It was there's some things that we like to improve on, but I think overall episode 1 went pretty well. What do you think, Zach?
Solid. I mean, I can't believe the support. Everyone came out, they came to support the podcast, have a good time, and I can't wait to keep doing this with you week after week.
Yeah, I think it was a solid week 1 effort. But anyways, we have some housekeeping things that we need to take care of. First off, we are on all the social media now. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You'll see all the social media down the bottom there. That is the best way if you want to ask some viewer questions or just kind of stay up to date with all the stuff that we're posting. We're going to be pretty active on it. Zach has a ton of stuff that he captured at the card party event that he attended last week. So lots of stuff is going to be going up there. So just in terms of like overall schedule for the podcast. So if you check out our YouTube channel banner, you'll see that we have a podcast going up every Wednesday. We record every Monday night, and that gives me a couple days to edit the video. Just in case something happens, I gave myself an extra day. So the video should be going up every Wednesday. This week was just a little bit of an outlier. We are 1 day late just because Zach didn't get back from card party until Tuesday night. But every Wednesday, there should be a podcast. And currently, right now, we are going to be only available on YouTube. I know that some of you guys would prefer the podcast be available on iTunes as well as Spotify. Basically, the reason for that is we need to push the YouTube channel to get to a certain threshold. Currently, the goal is to get to 500 subscribers. That way, we can unlock more features for the YouTube channel. Just so in terms of long run, we can keep this podcast going, make it more viable for us to continue making content for you guys. So as of right now, until we hit that threshold, podcast is only going to be available on YouTube. So that's pretty much it for all the housekeeping stuff. Let's get into the news.
Oh yeah, we got to jump right into card party. Oh my gosh, card party was so much fun. I cannot believe how much fun it was. And Tetra, I tried to get you to go, and dude, you missed out, man. You missed such a cool weekend.
I know.
Dude, Pat Flynn, Deep Pocket Monster, he put on one of the coolest events I've ever been to. So if you've ever been to Worlds, it's very, pro, hobby. It's very pro, player, collector. It's very much no vendors. If you go to some of the other shows, there's just a ton of vendors. There's not a lot to do. It's just kind of buy and sell. And card party, I feel was for the collector. There were so many things to do all weekend. It was so much fun. And Tetra, how do we get you to come to Card Party 2, the second edition?
I will be there next year. I'll come next year.
Committed?
Like I said, man, we just started this podcast like you and me were in the conversations of starting this podcast, and literally card party was in 2 weeks, and it just wasn't enough time for me to sort out the logistics of me going. But next year definitely will be going there to check out, meet all the content creators in the community. But you have some news. There's some stuff that happened at card party. Some good, some bad. So why don't you tell us all about that?
I think one of the best parts about card party was going to see, all your friends that you may talk to online over the years. There's a lot of people that actually went to card party that don't usually go to events. And so you could walk around in all the different rooms and talk to people. It was very well organized. They had, opening ceremony, closing ceremony, a lot of Q&As in between. And the Q&As, you got to ask crazy questions and people listen. There were some pretty big pulls along the way too. Shout out Pokemon Radar. He may have pulled one of the biggest cards from Neo Genesis. You gotta go check that out on his piece. And then there was a Quapless box break that Pokey Chloe and a bunch of other people hopped in. Deep Pocket Monster pulled some big hits. It was just nonstop pack pulling all weekend. And in addition to that, there was a little bit of drama that happened. And so, unfortunately, there was an item that was taken from
Give me the tea, Zach. Give me the tea.
To give you the tea? Give you the tea? No, you got to do it, man. You got to do it. I liked when you tried earlier.
No. So I'm reading. We have a Google Doc of all the topics, and I see just stolen first edition Team Rocket box. I'm just
yeah.
No, I was like, don't tell me about it. Save it for the podcast. So you let me know what happened with this first edition box that got supposedly stolen by Team Rocket.
I want to say the event was incredibly positive. I think Pat did a great job, and I don't want to take away from the event whatsoever. And the reason I put this in the list of things to talk about is because even at the most wholesome, good events, some bad things can happen. And unfortunately, someone who hasn't been discovered yet stole a Team Rocket, a first issue Team Rocket box from a vendor booth. They went up, took it, walked away. We kind of know when it was there, when it was gone. And basically, I remember walking into a room with people like, hey, you see a Team Rocket box? Hey, you see a Team Rocket box? And it's like, what happened? And so even at some of the best events, you really just got to, stay alert, watch out for your fellow collectors. And, we got to find the Team Rocket box, number one. And two, we got to get those people out of the hobby. We got to keep the hobby positive and moving forward.
So like, the Team Rocket, the Team Rocket box was just kind of like on a display case, like people could pick it up and everything. It wasn't like, because it was something like, let's talk about like value in terms of, because how much does the sealed Team Rocket box go for now?
I'd say first edition, it could be anywhere between maybe like 9 to 11K. It kind of depends. Sometimes, values will dip a little bit, but if you're doing a box break, usually you can get sort of the upper echelon of that. If you're buying in bulk, if you're buying like 5 or 6 at once, sometimes the price will go a little lower. But in terms of like how the setups are, usually it shows you'll have a, sort of a quad vendor booth or a vendor booth that'll wrap around, and there'll be cases, like cases where you can keep cards in between where you can't really touch and reach, and the vendors have to open the case and hand you a card. Well, booster boxes are a little too tall for those cases, so sometimes if a vendor has a big box, they can sort of put the case in, or other times they may put it behind the case or just slightly out of reach. But at a card show, you have friends always talking to you, people coming up, there's always something going on, there's always something taking your attention. And any of those of you that I might have seen this weekend, it was non-stop. Every 2 or 3 minutes you're talking to someone else you could talk to for days and days on end. So what I think probably happened is someone came up, the vendors were looking away, they probably reached up, grabbed the box, and walked off. I actually talked to the vendor at the show. I'm sure a lot of people talked to the vendor, and there were some things that happened at another event, not Card Party, a few weeks ago. I'm trying to think, Frankensons, where something was stolen, and that vendor actually had multiple cameras in their booth that were all facing down. So if you're a vendor, you got really high-end items, the camera's fairly affordable, and you could have that camera up, you could have it running 24/7. And so it would have been very easy to see who stole the box had the vendor had a camera. And I recommended that they put 2 or 3 around, kind of get all your angles. That way you mitigate the risk, and really the camera expense is much, much lower than what the box would be. But
yeah, for sure. Just like, I think like I would just expect everything like in terms of like anything extremely valuable at an event just to be always under lock and key, because it's just also like you talk about like the distraction. Like I'm willing to bet like there's probably that person obviously waited for distraction, either waited for a distraction to happen, or maybe it was like a tag team duo where you see it all the time in like security shop. There's usually a 2-person job where one person is literally there just to distract the vendor, and then they take off. So yeah, that's really unfortunate. Obviously that's something that's a learning thing for the next event. But yeah, it's hopefully that box eventually turns out, but there's no distinguishing features on those boxes, right? So that's one looks like the other one, so probably low chance of it showing up again.
I think the unfortunate part is to get to the vendor booth, you had to have a ticket to the event. So this was someone who paid for a ticket to the event that walked in. And so it was someone who came to the event to enjoy it. And they came with bad intentions. So really, really unfortunate.
Tell me about this. So you guys basically opened packs all weekend. It looks like you guys set a Guinness World Record for opening packs. So tell me about it.
Guinness Book of World Records. We're now in the Guinness Book of World Records for not only for Pokemon, but for the most packs opened of any TCG ever simultaneously. And the moment was a little surreal. There was a snake line of people going into the venue that was so long. And when you sat in the venue, basically they did a countdown to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You opened your pack. You had to hold it in the air. You had to wait 30 seconds. They got a count. And at the very end, the Guinness Book of World Records guy, he knows what he's doing. He's a pro. pro. He basically says, guys, we have a lot of people in this room, a lot of packs open, but if 10% of the people in the event don't open the pack, then we have to throw it out. So we got to make sure that, at least, that the majority of the people in the event open the pack. And Pat Flynn, after the event, came on and said, I made a mistake this weekend. I forgot to open my pack for the world record attempt. It's like, no. But lo and behold, we did make the record, and they had a custom card they passed out to everyone at the event. And it was such a cool experience to actually see the Guinness Book of World Records in person and be a part of that.
What was the number of packs?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I feel like it was like 1,900 or 2,000 or something around there. It wasn't like some, 100,000 or 50,000, but I mean, there was a lot of people there, but that's a lot of packs to be opened up within the same minute or so.
Did you get like the official Guinness World Record like plaque and everything? And like, who took that home?
I would assume that Mr. Flynn took that home. I would assume, it was very shiny, and how do they have it all printed up right away? It was kind of cool. They had all these auditors around, just double checking everything, tallying the scores. It was really, really cool.
Something like that would cause me great levels of anxiety because I am really bad at opening packs. I'm like all butterfingers. I see you like opening packs. It's just like, it's so seamless. But me, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I have like two left thumbs. Usually in most cases, when I open a pack, I actually don't even open it. I use scissors. It's the safest way to do it, but I mostly do it just because I don't know. There's something about packs. I can't, my brain does not wrap around opening it. So yeah, I'm glad that you had a good time at Card Party. It was eventful. I saw on Instagram basically everywhere, met a bunch of people. I saw pictures of Swole and his snap coughing and all that other stuff. So next year I definitely will head down there to wherever it's gonna be held in the same place next year.
It's not announced yet. The dates are announced yet, but everyone that attended Card Party this year already has the option to buy tickets for next year.
Okay.
So I'm sure there'll be a public announcement at some point. And I hope they do start doing Card World or something where they just start going everywhere, because like it truly was my favorite event I've ever been to. Extremely well run.
Awesome. So well, hopefully maybe next year we'll record a podcast down there.
Maybe we'll get on stage, do a panel.
Okay.
Who knows?
All right, so let's move into one of our reoccurring segments of the podcast, which is market trends and stuff that we've noticed that's going on in the hobby in terms of what's hot, what's not, what's selling, what's kind of stalling. So let's first talk about how basically autograph cards are basically fallen to pretty low levels comparisons of where they've been before. So let's get Zach's thoughts on autograph cards and basically where they are in the hobby at the moment.
Yeah, I think going and getting an autograph in person is like a surreal event. You get to see the artist, you get to meet him, you get to interact with them, maybe ask them a question. Don't spend like 10 minutes with them like some people do in the middle of this long line. But, they've changed sort of the terms with a lot of the events where, Alec, one of the guys that runs the autograph signings for the regionals, basically said, if you resell the auto or if you don't keep it or if there's any sort of economic activity around it, that you'll be banned from future events. So there's a lot of people that have sort of stopped selling autos from one point or another. And there are a lot of people who've kind of said, all right, I'm not going to go anymore. I'm just going to offload all the autos. And so it's kind of these weird market dynamic shifts where also the Pokemon companies coming in and really saying like, hey, like, it's okay to get an auto for yourself, but, we don't want to just create this whole other market where people are sort of profiting off Pokemon. They like to control the brand, the IP, and everything around it. So with all that said, it's kind of this weird sort of turning point where are we going to continue to have the same, or are things going to shift altogether? And Tetra, I think you were saying that some of the prices have sort of tanked. So what are some of the prices you've seen tank?
So I saw a post by the Fine Card. It was there was some variables to it. There were different auction houses. The grades weren't exactly the same, and the grades of the autographs weren't exactly the same, but I think it's still a good baseline and a litmus test to exactly where the market is. So it was like a first edition Charizard at its height signed by Arita was like 20K, and then the most recent one had like basically plummeted to around 5K.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you. Like I've always been very bearish on autograph cards, just because I see them because I kind of relate things to other hobbies. So if I take like another hobby like sports collectibles, like the scene for like sports signatures is just like, unless it's like on like, I don't know, patches or like
Mhm.
very limited edition cards, um the verification process on autographs isn't that great.
Mhm.
And it's honestly very easy if you hire an artist to forge a signature,
Mhm.
and that's basically how it is. And I think another reason why I've always been a little bit bearish on autograph cards is I was kind of like there around the time they were like, these artists were kind of just starting doing
Mhm.
these events where you would do signings. And in most cases, how I saw people on our hobby were approaching it is basically it was using the autograph signature as a way to obviously generate revenue. So the general formula that I've talked to multiple people who are in that early scene, and the general formula was taking lower grade cards, PSA sevens, eights, nines. At that time, even in first edition WotC, they were still somewhat affordable. It was really the tens that were still kind of up there. Basically, what people were doing was were buying seven, eights, and nines, cracking the cards out of the cases, taking the cards to wherever these signings are, and
Mhm.
basically trying to turn, I don't know, about a $500 to $1,000 profit based on the signature. Which, so that's kind of what my mindset has always been on these cards, is that they were just, and autographs in general were just a way to give lower value cards some
Mhm.
sort of a new market, in creating a new market. And that's probably why, another reason why I've always been so bearish on them. But I know
Mhm.
now, like you mentioned, TCPI is trying to crack down on the reselling of these cards, by basically, now I think they're required to add the person's name now in some cases. It's rough. I
Yeah,
don't know.
so Alec, he's a collector, that former player, not associated with Pokemon. I think his family's associated with some of the USA side. They've tried to crack down on the economic piece of it, but the Pokemon company themselves have come out and said, all right, you have to put a name, you have to put a date, you have to put some extra sort of parameters around it. And that goes for all events. And so there are some artists that will just do a signature and hand it off, sort of in a one-on-one private signing. But typically from now forward, if they're a contracted artist with the Pokemon company, they have to, put a name and a date and all that. Those that aren't contracted, they can they have more freedom to do what they want. But also it's up to Pokemon Company if they want to bring them back or not. So
Yeah, anytime
I
you
agree.
add like any sort of customization to the card beyond just the signature and possibly like a little sketch of something,
Mhm.
you immediately cut the buyer market, because no one wants a card with someone else's name written on it, right? And also what you said, that also immediately flags, and people can see the card, like who exactly this card was sold for, and then they'll pretty much ban you from coming to future events. But if you're not in the whole scene of autograph cards
Mhm.
just to turn a profit, I think there's like, obviously there's the experience of going to get an autograph. There's that moment where this, you just look in your binder or whatever, however you're getting the card graded possibly. I think there's a good intrinsic memory of going the
Mhm.
process of actually going there. You remember the event. But even that still, now you have, like, you've been to these autograph sessions, you have people lining up hours upon hours like the night before, to make sure that you get a card signed, right?
Yeah, been there. We yeah, it was a long night.
And then, yeah, like once you get your set cards, and then you have people going, like, getting back in the back of the line just to hopefully get another run at it. Like,
we,
there's,
we
because in most cases there's like limits of how many cards you can get signed per time slot, right?
Yeah, we may have cuddled a little too much in that line. It got a little cold, so the wait's kind of fun too. You get to bond with people and this and that. Do you have any autograph cards? Any sports
No,
cards?
no,
Have you ever aspired to get an autograph card?
no. Do you think we're at the floor now for autograph cards, or you think there's still a market there?
I think it's still going to keep going down a little bit. I think as people continue signing over and over and over again, more cards are going to come out. There's never an infinite money machine glitch out there. At least a big one. There may be some arbitrage you can take care of every now and then. Typically, when I buy an Arita auto, I usually give a $300 to $400 premium on the auto. So it's like, what's the cost to go see him, get in line, pay his $50 to $100, $200 fee to get a card signed. So when you have a first issue Charizard, you crack out of a case, you get it signed, you sell it for $4,000 more. All you're doing is you're going to incentivize 100 other people to show up and do that again. And the buyer pool for that, the market for that just isn't that deep. You're never going to sell 100 of those Zards at $20K. And what you saw is after the third one, it dropped all the way down to $4K. That's the low pop argument for you. If something's pop 2 and it goes to pop 5, that's the autograph argument for you. And so if you get a really good idea of demand and market and everything for the card, it can kind of help you give yourself a little more confidence when you're making an investment purchase or buying or selling.
Yeah, so I think like I said, I think we've pretty much ridden the wave of the high of autograph cards, and now it's basically where it's at, right? I don't see it ever going back up again, just because, like you said, supply is just always going to be so plentiful. But who knows? We never know about these things.
Well, typically when an artist dies, it may go up, at least in the short term, like really, really quickly. And then there's some artists who haven't signed for a while, like Ken Sugimori. If he were to sign, I think we would see chaos. We would literally see pure chaos. That'd be incredible if he did another sign. Maybe he does one at Worlds. Maybe he does a lottery. I don't want to know what the Facebook groups are going to look like if that happens. They're just going to light on fire, man.
Yeah, if it's not at Worlds, it's going to be absolute chaos. All right, let's move on to another part of the market, which is Poncho Pikachus are still absolutely stonking, which is if that was one thing that was very plentiful back in the day, I think I bought the entire set of everything. Like all the Poncho Pikachus, the Rayquazas, the Gyarados, the Magikarp. Like I have them all. And I bought them at like $80 a piece. And
dude.
And now they're like a minimum, and it's still, they're at like 5,000 now. I don't know where that market is in a PSI 10. And once again, it's one of those things where these like they were a promo. It's not a hard grade. So the PSA 10 availability is pretty plentiful. So that's something that I don't know how the Poncho Pikachu market is still out of control. Do you want to jump in and talk about that? What your thoughts are?
I kid you not, walking around all the vendor booths, most carts had prices. The vendors knew all what's going on, this and that. But every Poncho Pikachu I saw at a vendor booth didn't have a price on it. It was only like, we're still going up. Let's see, make a deal. And I'm like, there's not even a price. It's just so hot. No one wants to sell. And in moments like these, I always like to say, look back to 2020, 2021, when first ed base 10s and no one was selling. Sometimes it's better to sell into the hype and buy the dip. It truly, truly is. There was a $30,000 Polyrath that sold in that sort of hype, and no one was wanting to sell because like, oh, is it 50K, 100K? Everyone's getting greedy. How many Poncho Pikachus are out there, do you think, Tetra?
I haven't checked that pop-up report, but there are a lot of them. They were readily when I bought them, they were readily available. People couldn't buy, sellers couldn't get rid of them. They had so many of them. It's just I don't know what's going on with the Poncho Pikachus. I would not, if I was in the, I would not be buying into the market right now if I had that much money, just to do like a buyout, because I think we are eventually going to have a little bit of regression. But that's I probably would have said that at 2K though, right? And now we're at 5, so who knows?
Selling to the hype. Think about how many people sold their first edition base at Pikachu's at 15K. There was more than one, and I'm sure they're all very happy they sold. So I'm not saying the Poncho Pikachu's are going to go down to like a K or $500 again, but at 5K a piece, it just seems like there's a lot out there to, there needs to be a lot of capital in the market to support that price point.
I wouldn't buy into that. But we also have another rising trend, which is the rise of waifu cards, namely the infamous Lily cards. So when we talked last week, we mentioned that one sold for 60K in PSA 10, and then one recent sale actually was for 100K now. Which is, we're talking about a somewhat limited run because it was a contest card, selling more than legitimate 1999 trophy cards at 100,000. So what do you think of that?
I want to hear your thoughts, man. I mean, like waifus are just kind of hitting me from the side right now. I don't even know what to think. Like, I wonder who's actually buying these.
Chinese collectors.
I don't know.
Anything PSA 10 and Japanese and limited edition, it's just Chinese collectors. That is one that I would not buy into the hype at 100,000 whatsoever. If you buy it just because you really want it and you don't care what the value of it is, then that's perfectly fine. But I wouldn't buy into that into the hype right now at 100,000. I honestly thought like after the 60K though, the next one probably would sell like for like 30. But
yeah,
that's what I don't know.
Who would have thought some of the most popular, most expensive Pokemon cards don't even have Pokemon on them?
Yeah,
I mean, it's blowing my mind, dude. Blowing my
we'll,
mind.
We'll monitor the situation with Waifus, but I think they're here to stay.
I may have bought a few staff lilies at the event because of all the stuff going on. So I'm not saying I'm in it, but I'm just saying like, hey, like if you get a chance to get something cool, why not? So,
yep. And also we have there's currently going on an auction right now at Goldin, the pretty much the flagship card for the hobby, which is the Illustrator card. They have one going on right now. The auction ends tonight. I think it did close.
Yeah, it did.
It closed at 570. So
570K.
570. Okay, I'm gonna let you take the floor and let me know what you think about the final price.
So the 570K for the 8.5 is lower than what the Illustrator sold in the Chinese market a couple months ago. I believe that was an 8 and it sold around 800,000 if I'm not mistaken. And so this was kind of a dip. There were some integrity issues with the Chinese auction house and that sale. If I'm not as familiar with the Chinese marketplace, but from what I've been told and just talking to other people, there may be some manipulation here and there. I've never actually bid on anything in the Chinese market. But lo and behold, I think some people were questioning the integrity of the sale. And so I think it's safe to say that perhaps the Goldin sale is more in line. It's actually more in line with some past sales in the past. When you look at kind of the 7 that auction and the 9.5 that auction, this 8.5 is a pretty strong showing compared to the old sales. But according to the Illustrator, the 8 that sold in the Chinese market, it is a bit of a dip. But was that a real sale or not? I don't know. I don't know who the buyer was. It hasn't come back up for sale. But I think personally, if you forget about the Chinese auction sale altogether, this 8.5 actually did pretty well. The 570K, and you got to remember how many collectors of 8.5s are there out there. I think people want an 8 or a 9, but an Illustrator is an Illustrator. So does it even matter? So
I think it's one of those cards, unless it's like chopped in half.
Yeah.
There's a floor there, of which none of us can reach right now. But I think like I know that I have an idea what some of them are right now, and I think 8.5. Like I think it was evaluated the Logan Paul one. He evaluated when he did his trade in with Dubsy. I think the valuation of his 9 that he traded to Dubsy, he evaluated at like 1.5. I think
it was 1.2 million.
1.2, and that was like at the height.
Yeah.
That wave when Pokemon was still going crazy during the COVID era. I think 1 million for 9 is pretty. I don't think you're gonna get your legs cut off at a 1 million. But I don't know. It's just thoughts.
I've made several $1 million+ offers on a 9, not all cash. A good bit of it was trade, and they were all declined. So sometimes just getting the card is hard enough, and so we are in this sort of weird space where why are there so many illustrators popping up? Why are they so available? This wasn't always the case. But also remember in 2015 when there was or maybe it was 2016 over the summer, there was a period where like 10 first head base Zards all popped up at auction, buy it nows, and they were going for between 4 to 6K. And I think I bought 2 during that sort of time frame, and then sort of over time that kind of died off. They were less available. So it's also like, because they're so available, because the price I think is a little lower at the auction price, what you think it is, maybe what it should be. Is this a good time to buy? Is this a good time to get in? Are these all going to private collectors, people who don't want to sell? And so are they getting locked away, or is this going to continue this trend of an Illustrator being available every few months? Like, this hasn't always been the case. What do you think, Tetra?
I don't know. It's with that type of market. I think when you're talking about like a card with that limited amount of copies out there, with that limited amount of buyers, it's very easy to control the flow of how many of these come to market. So it's basically whoever wants to sell at that point will, and I'm sure there's conversations that we're not privy to, but who knows? We'll see. I think Logan Paul, like his PSA 10 that he traded for, it's up for like you could buy a piece of it. I think he put it up that you can buy like a certain chunk of it, just so he could recoup his money, because I think what was his trading value or like his exchange value for it?
So I think that was through Liquid Marketplace, and
Yeah.
he offered up for $5 million.
Yeah.
But I mean, you had to also agree with their business model for you to invest and stuff. And so that's actually probably a good topic for maybe a future podcast. There's a lot of pros and cons, and it's more difficult to enter that market and kind of own a piece of Illustrator than you may think. I think a lot of them are trying to make it a little bit easier, but even just going through and trying to buy a share, or maybe 100 shares or something like that, there's a process to it. So it's not as easy as just logging onto your stock app and buying a stock.
All right, so let's move on to the main topic of the week, which is the purchase of the Snap Pikachu by our friend Dubsy for 270K. Dubsy, if you guys don't know, it's just, yeah, his collection is definitely by far the best Pokemon collection in the entire world. He basically owns everything at this point. And with the purchase of the Snap Pikachu, he is the first one in the world to ever complete the entire Snap collection, because that is the only Snap Pikachu that to this date has been sold. So there was one that popped up last year, I think, for 265,000 on a random auction. It didn't sell because the seller was a very low reputation seller, so it kind of went on sale on auction and then just kind of disappeared. Cannot confirm that it's the same copy, but it's only the second copy that has ever surfaced, and the first one, to our knowledge, at this point, that has ever been purchased. So, just briefly, I'll go over the details of what the Snap cards are. So, it was a two-stage illustration contest. Basically, what happened was you had to take pictures of certain Pokemon, or just Pokemon in general, in the original Pokemon Snap game that came out in 1999. The first one was ran by Cora Comics, and then there were 5 winners selected for that contest. So you had the Bulbasaur, the Poliwag, the Magikarp, the Gyarados, and then the infamous Snap Pikachu that just sold. In that first run of contest, the winner was awarded 20 copies of each of those cards, and then a second contest ran again a couple of weeks or months later, and it was actually a TV contest by TV Tokyo, and then there were another set of 5 cards awarded, which included the Coughing, the Charmander, the Bulbasaur, the Articuno, as well as the Chansey. Based on just stuff that I know in terms of confirmed sales, I know that Max Mofo purchased the Gyarados when I was in the hobby. I think he purchased it for 50,000 US dollars, and then I think that an Articuno popped up last year. I forget the sale price of that. And then a Chansey popped up as well. If I think it sold for 60K. And one of our community members that we know, Swolpoke, I think he owns the Coughing, which is, I think, actually the highest graded snap card that I have ever seen, which has
Mhm.
ended up being a 9 because all the snap cards in general, they're very off-centered, which really
Mhm.
take away from its eye appeal. So to get a 9 in a snap card is actually a pretty big accomplishment.
I think that's absolutely crazy. The snap cards, they're only being 20 copies of each. I mean, just building a set of that's insane. I remember like 6, 7 years ago, there was a Charmander listed on Marketplace in the UK for 3,500, and that was just so much money at the time. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's a lot." And in the moment, it was pretty beat up too. So in the moment, I was like, "I don't know, this doesn't make sense. It just feels like a good buy." I didn't buy it, and then someone else bought it, so resold it for, I don't know if it was like 6K or 10K or something. And I think that same Charmanders have sold way, way more now.
Yeah.
But again, when there's only 20 copies, I mean, the market's kind of in the hands of the seller.
So there were 20 copies of that first run contest. But I think there are whisperings that in the second run of the contest, there were actually only there were less. There were only like 15 copies handed out. It's
Mhm.
just I know that at the time when they were awarded, probably people didn't think of like the long-term ramifications of handing out such a limited amount of copies to a single seller because knowing what we know now, if you own those cards and you
Mhm.
owned all of them and you didn't end up giving them away, you basically completely control the market. You have the market by the balls at that point of exactly what you want to sell. But I'm assuming like because a large majority of the winners were probably of a younger generation and were probably children. They were probably just like they're like, oh, I have 20 of these now. Here, close fan member, you can have one. Friend, you can have one. It's just yeah, is to be able to control the market in that way, in type of way, as an older person would
Yeah.
feel very empowering and very intoxicating, right?
I know we think about the price and the market and all that now, but I mean, how cool would it be just go back and look at the innocence of that moment of the kid just has a cool card and wants to share with everyone, and that kind of goes back to the theme of the hobby. You got to catch them all and share with your friends this and that. So I think there's some beauty sort of in that example you gave, but also at the same time, looking back, it's kind of like we talked about the English VS deck last week. One
Yeah.
of the players actually left their VS deck on the table and walked away. Didn't even take it with them. So I know it's crazy, but it's like in the moment you don't really think of it as, the value and what it could be. You just kind of
Oh
you
my
treat it for what
god.
it is. You want a contest in the moment. You got a cool Pikachu. Share it with your friends.
$100,000 just flushed down the drain.
Hmm.
It-
I mean, it's insane. I think this actually is kind of a good segue into one of the other topics we had up, which is the extra copies of cards that exist. And so, for the longest time, a Pika hadn't really surfaced. And what if the winner threw them away? What if they did, hand them out to people and they didn't know what to do? And so, was that Pika that came up, was that an extra copy? Can it be traced back to a winner? I actually don't know that answer. So if that's out there, I apologize. But at the same time, a lot of cards do have extra copies out there. And Tetra, what's your experience in the extra copies or just information you may be aware of?
so so the video that they posted, Pro Retro X, which is the company or slash person who actually ended up buying the Snap Pikachu for Dubsy, kind of like the middleman. There's a shot of him in the store where the card is actually being purchased, and he flat out asks for the origin story
Hmm.
of the Snap Pika. Was
Hmm.
it the original owner or was it another person? And pretty much the Japanese person, in the most polite way as possible, just refused to answer the question. It's a valued customer, basically. I think what he
Yeah.
put it as. So, but it kind of it's just once again it's just shows how limited the cards are. We talked about like the Snap Magic card that just showed up. It was purchased by Dubsy last year for I think 100,000. For the longest time, the same thing with the Pika. We never saw a copy ever hit the market whatsoever,
Hmm.
and a lot of people thought that based on the fact that a copy never showed up, is speculated maybe because Japan has had its fair share of natural disasters over the year. They thought that maybe it was a lost card that didn't survive. Like I think it was an earthquake during the time, or there's been floodings, there's been earthquakes. Some people thought because we haven't seen one at this point that maybe it got lost in a natural disaster. But long and behold, one did eventually show up, and it was kind of crazy because that card just sat in a Japanese store for a long time. It was never. I think the store started it off at like 30,000 US, and then they didn't have any biters. You have to remember that no one knew that this card was there because
Mhm.
social media wasn't there was no promotion for it. I think it started off at like 30,000 and it dropped all the way down to like 24 or something, and then still didn't have bad analogy, but it didn't have any biters on at 24 or something like that. And then eventually the store decided just to auction it off publicly, and then long and behold, it ends up being like the auction price far exceeded what the store was originally looking for, just because it opened up the market completely to basically anyone in the world. That just kind of it goes like a little bit of like how difficult it
Mhm.
is to buy Japanese cards, if especially on the higher end, especially if you don't live in Japan. So personally myself, I've done the whole importing of cards
Mhm.
before, ordering buying cards off Yahoo Japan or buying them off Macari, and you can't buy them and have them shipped directly to your house. You actually have to have a middle person. So a lot of when everyone knows who's imported before, they probably use the same person, which is Vivi Japan or Hamada, and the the process in itself is also kind of like also very stressful because so what happens basically what it comes down to, you have the middle person's email or you go to their website, you send them the listing to what you want to purchase, and then you wait for them to respond to you, and then they will give you a grand total where you have to send a PayPal payment to, and then once that PayPal payment has cleared, then they purchase it. So if you're talking like super high end or something just randomly pops up for like half a second, you want to like purchase that almost immediately, right? You don't want to wait for someone to like get the email and jump online. But
Mhm.
that's just the way it is. I think the biggest, and then eventually what happens is I I had purchased like been a reoccurring customer to Amada, VV Japan. Eventually, I like wrote a very nice email because yeah, everything you have to be very polite and everything because that's just Japanese culture being very polite. I basically said like, if possible, uh, could you purchase the item before I send the fund, just so I can kind of like shorten that process a little bit. And because I had purchased so much from him slash her before, eventually that we removed that step. So I sent him a link and then he immediately purchases it. Then I send him the money, which is it's such a small thing, but it makes such a huge difference when you're talking about purchasing something that high. Like if you see something you want to purchase immediately, because there are people who live Elliot, our friend Poke Chaos, he lives on Macari and he lives on Yahoo Japan. No one will see any card before Elliot. Elliot sees everything first. So,
Mhm.
and then there's also like that like window, like if he emails VV Japan first, like he gets the card first. Like you know what I mean? It's just
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. And even like if you have a login of someone and you log in, you try to buy it yourself, they'll see you're coming from like North America IP address or like a European IP address, and they'll block it. They like won't even let you buy it. So you actually have to have someone in Japan do that. And there are people, collectors that now live in Japan that can buy. There's high end collectors that used to live in the US that now live in Japan that they could snap by it. So if you think about how many times you've seen a huge card come up for sale and it just right away it goes away, it may be someone they just sort of figure out a way to skip that step of going through. But myself and a lot of other people, I still go through a service if I use something. And when you trust people with money, you got to really trust them. I think, as you know, we have some claims and stuff. You gotta protect yourself. So
Yeah, but
Mhm.
that being said, like a lot of people have like this like notion that like I can go to Japan and I don't know in a couple days. Let's just say my trip for leisure is just like 2 weeks. I can like take a day or so and like just go to like Japanese card shops and like buy whatever I want, which is like almost the Japanese are very traditional and like
Mhm.
big deals like that, they generally don't close that quickly. You just can't walk into the shop and just decide I want to buy this card. First off, there's very little negotiation. The price is the price. And also you're kind of behind the ball as well if you don't speak Japanese. They are less likely to deal with you because um, I'll be upfront. There's a little bit of bias
Mhm.
of Japanese sellers just because they prefer to sell and keep the cards within Japan. They feel that Japanese card should stay within the country. That's why there's such a reluctance to send knowing to sell to someone knowing that this card is going to leave the country at some point. But at the end of the day, when you're talking like this high end Snap cards, Snap Pikachu, Snap Magikarps, um, cash is king, right? At the end of the day, cash is king. And if you have a buyer that's willing to spend much more than what the Japanese market can bear, they will sell it to you. But I think that the same company that middled the Snap Pikachu, I think he also posted a video of him purchasing the Snap Magikarp, and basically the same thing is like they will do almost it's almost like they don't want to sell you the card at all. They will put so many barriers in front of you and you have to meet all their qualifications just to purchase the card. So um in like in the case of the Snap Pikachu, it had to be either in straight cash or if it was going on credit card, it had to be one payment on a single credit card. He would not let the buyer split the payment whatsoever. So you're talking about the Visa Black or the Amex Black people, those type of people who can put a $270,000 US onto a single purchase on a credit card. So like the 1% of the 1%, like basically no one. They would not accept PayPal. They would not expect splitting anything up. It had to be either straight cash or one swipe on your credit card. So that's obviously a barrier that you would have to overcome. And then in that video, he also referenced that when he was buying the Snap Pikachu, he said, "Okay, we have a deal. I'm gonna come back tomorrow, meet all your requirements of purchasing this card." And the store was basically like, "Well, that's the price of the card for today. So we can't guarantee how much the card is going to be tomorrow, right?" So it's just like it's almost as if they don't want you to purchase the card. So let's just
Mhm.
the idea of flying over to Japan and just randomly visiting Japanese stores and making big purchases is probably not your best use of time if you're visiting the country, spending a ton of money to visit Japan. But yeah, it's basically it's what it
we
is.
we got to do the meme that's like that was yesterday's price or something like that, or one of those things. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
purchasing and importing Japanese cars are very it's a difficult process and I don't wish it upon anyone.
and getting cash in Japan is actually very difficult, like getting physical cash. And so, it's hard to actually, enter the country with all that. And you have to have all these sort of requirements and receipts and invoice and this and that. So, a lot of places take credit card, but like if you need physical cash, it's actually
Mhm.
pretty difficult to do. Um,
So pretty much what would happen is Dubsy would like have to like give his credit card like like
card.
yeah, I'm gonna give you my Amex Black, and you
Mhm.
you go swipe once, and then yeah, it's just a whole lot of nonsense.
I'm just curious what kind of shot of tequila he had after getting that card and celebrating. So,
Yeah.
which he actually doesn't have the card in hand yet, because one of our good friends, Mr. Fuji, was at card party this weekend, and he was passing the Snap Pikachu around.
Oh.
So sorry, Dubsy. Pika was very friendly this weekend. We got to all hang out a little bit. I got a cool photo I'll show you guys of a few of our friends in the Pika. It's kind of cool.
That'd be awesome just to hold it in your hand.
Oh,
But
I held it.
yeah, you've probably held up like every major card in the hobby in your hand at some point, right?
I may have been walking around card party with an Illustrator in my pocket.
All right, so let's move on to the personal card features section of the podcast. A section that I enjoy because we get to share cards in our personal collection to talk about and kind of feature. So the card that I wanted to feature this week was the Scampa Pikachu, just to kind of go in line with the most expensive Pikachu. Well, unless you take out the Illustrator, obviously, which has a Pikachu on it. The second most expensive Pikachu that has ever sold with Dubsy Snap Pikachu. I am presenting this week the most expensive Pikachu in my collection, which is the sample Pikachu, which I actually have a couple copies of. One's actually at PWCC right now on a fixed price listing. And then I have a couple more tucked away. I don't have it on me right now because I actually didn't get a chance to run to the bank to pick it up. But I will go to the bank and shoot like a secondary video of it a little bit later. But yeah, Sample Pikachu, it's a really cool card because it actually has, it was in a transition phase of Japanese as well as English, right? Because we all know the E series set was Watsy's Wizard of the Coast last Pokemon set that they created. So there was like a transition period to TCPI, which makes it really cool because it has an English front, but it actually has a Japanese back. And although there's kind of like speculation of the origins of this card and its in purpose, there's really no concrete information. It's one of those like gray areas in the hobby where we don't have like absolute confirmation of what was going on with this card and its origin story. I have three of them. I bought one at auction, then I bought one as a I'd buy it now, and then I think I bought the complete sample set from TCA Gaming, our good friend Rusty. I tried to get a fourth one, but Zach ended up picking it up.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think even though it is my card, Zach is the English WotC aficionado on the podcast, so I will pass it to him, and he can kind of give you guys a good background information on the card.
And he's not counting the trophy Pikas in the second highest value, the 97 trophies and all that. But it truly is like the most, probably one of the most rare Pikas out there. How many copies exist is up to speculation, so I don't want to give a hard number here. It is actually the lowest pop sample card grade in the 10 card sample card set. The second lowest is Pichu, so you got that Pikachu Pichu line right there. And then of all the sample cards graded, there's only 25 graded of each card. So we know there's at least 25 copies out there. Speculated. I mean, there's probably a little bit more, but we'll see. And every time I pull and open an expedition pack, and I've probably opened more expedition packs than any other set, and I pull a card that's from the sample set, I always like, oh, that's a sample. It could be a sample, this and that. And you see the little sample at the bottom right.
That card has like so much going on for it because just like aesthetically, I think it's personally, I think it's the best looking Pikachu in terms of artwork in the entire hobby. It's the typical Dishida artwork, very whimsical, pastel colors, same as the Lotto Zard or the Expedition Zard. I think that is probably one of the best looking Charizards in the entire hobby. So it just kind of like really screams at you when you take a look at it for the very first time. And obviously, as a Pikachu is like a very highly sought after species. RIP to all you guys out there if you are Pikachu collectors, because there's just that in Charizard. I don't think there are any more. I don't that in Charizard. There's definitely more Pikachus in the hobby than there are Charizards. But yeah, if you are a Pikachu collector, you can just good luck with that one. Good luck.
There's no bias there whatsoever. You own in 3 of the 15.
Let's just not talk. Let's just not talk about it. I control 1/5 of the market. Sample. But anyways, so the sample set, there's 10 cards in the entire sample set. based on what I understand, they were originally print, although they had the Japanese backing, they were printed in the US. Basically, they were printed to and sent to the Pokemon Center in New York when there was a Pokemon Center in New York. Right now, it's a Nintendo store, an overall arching store. There's no Pokemon Center dedicated for New York. But they were used to basically demonstrate the e-reader capabilities of the signature e-series cards and basically show the public how e-series work. Like Zach said, there's no actual confirmation on the exact number. I think Bubblepedia speculates between. I've heard from anywhere from like 50 to 100. There's no way to tell, but once again, because you are actually to demonstrate the e-reader, you actually have to swipe it through the e-reader machine. So in terms of grading, that automatically kind of lowers the amount of near mint to mint copies that are on the market at the moment, and then whatever copies were left, then those obviously have surfaced. They have popped up, especially the not very popular species. They
Mhm.
have been popping up pretty regularly on the market. So you have seen a lot of sample Pikachu sample cards in general show up on the market. I think they range between anywhere between a couple thousand all the way to, I think the highest ever sold price for a sample Pikachu happened in 2021. I think the last publicly sold price was 12,000.
Oh
I
wow.
think, and I think it was auctioned by PWCC. So it's a good, it's a very nice card. I also love the Pichu from that set. I am this close to completing the master set of the Pichu. The only one that I'm missing is the match print one, which is actually on auction right now, right?
It is. It is. There's a heritage auction with the Blastoise match print coming up, so we'll see. We'll see where that ends. Maybe set a match print market.
But I will not. I have a couple match print cards, but definitely I am not going to enter the match print. That set will be forever. I am forever not going to be able to finish the match print set. Like the Pichu, because there was the Pichu and the Hobbit. There were the
Mhm.
manhole ones with the cards punched out, and then we have all the reverse hollows and reverse hollow ones from the expedition because there's expedition versions of it. And then there was also like an E3 version of it, that card as well, the E3 Hoppet as well as the E3 Pichu. Like I said, the only one I do not have at this moment is the match print one, and I don't think that's ever going to happen.
It's gonna be tough. The match print set. Rusty had two full sets of them, TCA Gaming, and he auctioned off a full set. Then he kept a full set. And I think over time he got crazy offers on some like 5K. And so he started breaking it up. I actually own the Cadaver match print because it was like there's only so many Cadabras, and so I thought it would be kind of cool to get one of those. So that's kind of tucked away in the collection somewhere.
I know I have the Feraligatr. I think I own 3 match prints. I own the Feraligatr and I own another 2 that I don't remember what species they were. So the Feraligatr artwork for Expedition was really nice as well. It was kind of very similar to the Blastoise one. It's kind of like half underneath water. That's that's like one of my favorite Blastoise artworks in the entire hobby. So yeah, and I think they're like I outbid like Reina for me for like I think they were like 350 a pop or something, which was and I was like in like a bidding war with her. But yeah, so yeah, what is your card of this week that you want to show off?
So going to card party, I had a good friend of mine I haven't seen in a long time, Diego Dolbasaur. Hadn't seen him since we were at Worlds in Anaheim in 2017. Got to hang around him a little bit. And some of my favorite cards in my collection are the ones that are given to me as from friends as gifts that have some special meaning. And it's like it doesn't matter what the card's worth. Like you'd never sell something that was given to you as a gift. And he just knowing how much I love Jolteon, he actually gifted me off center Jolteon Unlimited. So you can see how off center that is, left to right. Just the border on one side is much smaller than the other. And then in addition to that, he also had an off center first edition Jolteon. And isn't that just crazy? That's so crazy.
He gifted that to you?
He gifted it to me. I literally said, Diego, I'll give you whatever you want. I'll get your bar tab for the night. Whatever you need. And he's like, you're not allowed to pay me for it. He's like, we've been friends all these years. You got to take them. And I'm not saying no for an answer. Take them. And I'm speechless. Like, shout out Bulbasaur. Like, dude, you're awesome, man.
You never buy me nice things. What do I gotta do to get that type of treatment?
I did get you something nice at Card Party that you aren't aware of yet. So you got to send me your mailing address and I'll ship it to you.
Okay.
But I do have something for you, and it is related to last week's podcast.
Oh, very cool.
That's your one hint.
Okay, I look forward to getting it in the mail. Oh, but that's really cool. Has PSA, because when I was collecting really hard, have they kind of been a little bit more lenient on the grading of, because they were like complete, like really anal when I was like really deep in the hobby of awarding the OC moniker to cards. Are they still that hard on them?
You don't know how many times I've submitted cards hoping for a qualifier, not got a qualifier.
Yeah.
So since then, they've hired some more people more familiar with the community, and they basically said like, hey, like Pokemon actually has really good quality control, at least in the beginning years. Getting an error card or a card that would deserve a qualifier is actually a little bit more rare, a little bit harder to get. These cards actually have a higher value. And so someone at PSA I talked to basically said that they were talking to someone who helps train the graders and this and that. They basically said, hey, this one card I bought is $1,000, as an error. Without the error, it's only like $100, but it makes it so much more valuable. And the guy said, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize it jumps the value that high. And so because there's a market for it, because there's a demand for it, PSA in the last year or so has become much more open to it. Now, is that also due to competition and CGC being open to it and CGC getting all the cool error cards now? Who knows? But as of today, you could send a all-center card to PSA, and there's a good chance it'll get the qualifier, which has been a huge dissatisfaction thing for many of us in the hobby. So it's nice to see competition kind of drive change for the positive in the community that we have.
Yeah, it was OC cards that was really difficult to get the qualifier, as well as the hollow cards that had streaks in them. That was also one that people, for some reason, PSA just would not hand out qualifiers. If anything, they actually took those factory errors as a way to downgrade the final grade of the cards. So it's nice to know that they've actually started to recognize some of the more common errors in the hobby.
I mean, they took them as damage. And if you look at the sports card community, anything with a qualifier basically decreases the value quite a bit. So I remember at National, like a couple of years ago, I bought a football card that is normally priced around $1,500, and I bought it for $500 because it had a qualifier. Same grade with the qualifier. Like, that's just how much the sports community values it, because they are so common. They are everywhere, and people want a well-centered card. People want a card that looks good and presentable. But the thing is, most Pokemon cards, they look pretty good. And so it's getting a qualifier is kind of the exception, not the rule.
I said last week, it's like one of the only card collecting hobbies where like these error cards actually are desirable and they carry a bit of a premium. Like you said, like in sports, it actually makes the card worth a lot less. But yeah, it's crazy. So that's a really cool share. I'm very excited to see what you're sending me in the mail, though. Now I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm kind of like what? I'm like thinking to myself,
I'm not telling you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's the share portion of this week. We'll probably bring something new next week as well.
So we're moving to the next section in the podcast called Viewer Questions, where Tetra and I actually read all the questions you guys post in the first 24 hours of the podcast. We'll pick a few. And what?
We got one question this week. One question. Yeah. We only got one this week. So if you want,
it's a great question.
It's a good question. But if you guys want your questions answered, either comment in the video below or on our social media, because we are basically on everything now: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Leave a question there, and we will scour through all the questions, and you will most likely, based on the fact that we only have one this week, it will most likely be answered.
So from Zard Hunter, our number one question asker, we expect you to come back every week. He asked a very insightful question, which has kind of made us both think quite a bit. And he said, what card do you regret selling the most? So Tetra, you've been in this hobby a long time. What card could that be?
Okay, so I caught myself in a lie. because I have long told that I've never stole the card in the hobby. But when I actually look back on it, I have, because in when I was getting into hobby, um, around 2017, I was kind of jumping into it, and I didn't know the difference between, because the eBay listings would often say thick stamp, thin stamp, and I had no idea what that meant. So I was kind of like looking through all the cards I had purchased at that point, and I was like, "Oh, so this is what they mean. This is the difference between a thick and a thin stamp first edition." Because I think first edition base is the only time that those things have been differentiated based on the stamp itself. So I was just kind of buying all my cards, and mostly en masse, I had thick stamps. But I did notice that I did have a thin stamp Nido King, and then I was like, "Oh man, I only have one of these now." It was like my OCU is like getting triggered. I was like, "Okay, I gotta get a thick stamp Nido King somewhere." So what happens is immediately when I figured out what thick and thin stamp was, I sold the Nido King on eBay at a loss of what I paid up for, just because I was like, I don't want this anymore. Just whatever I sell it for. I think I sold it at like a $200 loss. Um, and then I eventually picked up a thick stamp one. So that is the one and only card at this moment that I have sold thus far. I have a couple of cards coming up in the PWCC auction that starts in a couple weeks, but to this date, I have only sold one card, and that is the card that I sold. But for all the because we all start somewhere. Every winner was once a beginner. Everyone was like me, and now there are people like Zach. Zach, can you explain to the people the difference between a thick stamp and a thin stamp first edition uh, stamp, basically?
Oh man, what a good question. And I feel like that's a question a lot of people ask me that are hobby. They're like, there's thick and there's thin. That's like, I thought there was just first edition. It's like when I look at it, there's a one with a circle and it looks like first edition. So a thick stamp is basically a stamp where the one is thicker in the middle, the gap in the one. And the thin stamp actually has a very thin one. And so it's kind of counterintuitive because the thin stamp actually has more black ink around it. It's actually kind of a darker stamp. And the thick stamp actually has a little bit less ink because the one is wider and there's more of a gap in the middle. So if you're confused and you're still trying to figure out what's thick and what's thin, all of the non-hollow cards for first edition base are thick. And then a good set to reference if you're trying to get an example of a thin stamp is basically after first edition base. The stamps sort of transition to more of a thin, and like Team Rocket, for example, they're all thin stamps. So if you look at any sort of Team Rocket card, that's what a thin stamp looks like. A non-hollow first edition base is what a thick stamp looks like. And so for the first edition base in particular, it's speculated that the holographic print run is half thick and half thin. It's widely accepted that the thick stamps are worth a little bit more and a little bit more valuable. That's sort of been a trend or it's sort of been a market sort of perception over time. And so people have just been buying thicks and preferring them for a while. That kind of came from Gary, King Pokemon, Gary from Pawn Stars, the Gary. He's always preferred thick. And so I think just naturally people just, if they could buy a thick or a thin, people go buy the thick. And they sort of faded away from the market. So I know some people that have tried to buy a thick stamp Charizard recently. They just haven't been able to. Most of them that you look up are thin. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, again, just to go over that one more time, the thin stamp basically has a little bit more black ink. It's a very thin one. It basically means the gap in the middle is just a very, very thin one. And the thick stamp kind of has a thicker one where the black ink is a little bit smaller on the outside. So to me, it's a little counterintuitive, but that's just kind of what the hobby's accepted. Thick is worth a little bit more. Thin's worth a little bit less. But at the same time, it's still first edition base hollow. It's got to be worth something.
Is there any confirmation of exactly what caused the thick and thin stamp?
I think there's some speculation. I also collect a few other things called like back stamps that kind of go in the back of a card. And sometimes, you think a stamp may be double printed. And so that's why you kind of have a thinner piece. They may have changed the palette or the plate. There's all kinds of ideas out there. First edition base also has 3D stamps. And if you look at those are on the non-hollows where it actually looks like the stamp was hit twice and there's kind of an outline around it. I doubt that's how they intended to make it. So it seems like maybe it kind of got hit or something. But again, it's all just speculation. I've talked to a few people who are very familiar with printing presses, and they've given a sort of a range of things that have happened. But unless you talk to someone that worked with Wizards of the Coast, which I know they're out there, they probably don't like giving all the interviews all the time. But you're welcome to come on and tell us. I mean, that's a great, if you're one of those people, come join us. Tell us how they were made.
I just think that it was like there was just way too much. Like there was excess. I guess in this case, it'd be less ink on the thick stamp one than there was intended. So the one ended up coming out quote unquote a little bit cleaner. But like Zach said, there's really no way to determine exactly what caused it. There's no like most things in this hobby. There's really no definitive answer. It's just mostly speculation. But yeah, that was my first edition thin stamp Nidoking, the one and only at this moment card that I have sold. So Zach, what is yours?
Oh my gosh,
You've sold so many cards.
What are you talking about? You regret the only thing you've ever sold. But no, for me, I sort of I'm kind of a sucker when it comes to helping people out and trying to help a friend out here and there. And someone really wants something for the collection, I want to try to help them get it. Or if there's any way that because so many people have helped me over the years, and I truly appreciate that. There was a friend that was asking me for a first edition base Zard. He knew I had, I think, like 4 at the time, and so he just kept asking. Eventually, I was like, you know what? Like, okay, I know you really want one. Here you go. And so I sold it to him. I knew the card was going to go up. I mean, speculation is going to go up, but I really felt like that's something to hold. I bought them to hold forever. I never really want to sell one. So I sold him the card for $10,000. And then a year later, he sold it for right around $30,000. So I sold it to him because I thought it was a collection piece, a forever piece. And he sold it for the money. So, yeah, it kind of hurt a little bit when I saw him sell. It's like, why did you hold it a little longer? But I mean, I guess when things go up too high, you gotta,
Yeah, everyone has their price, right? Like exactly what they want to let things go at. I'll be honest, I have a price in my head of what I would let my Charizard go for. If it'll be out there, who knows? But it's such a gamble to hit that perfect inflection point where the card is at its maximum value, because you've sold, like, you had that Charizard, but I remember when I was really like a couple years into the hobby, you auctioned a Charizard as well, and I think it ended up selling for like 24, 26 ish, around that range.
Sold around 24. So those of you that don't know, I actually left undergrad to work for a few years, and I went back to complete my college in 2018. And so when I did that, I didn't have a job. And so in order to pay for rent and tuition and all that stuff on my own, I basically sold a Charizard to help support that for 24. So I sold it because I had to, and I didn't want to break up the rest of the collection. It was my third Zard. It made sense. It was the most expensive thing. It helped pay the bills. But looking back, and why I regret that 10K sale is because I know I still would have had that card. There was never another moment where I would have sold it, except when it hit 300 or so. I probably would have sold it around 300 because it was an extra. And it's like, well, that's 300 that I could have put, back in other things. But the sort of the silver lining here is I took the 10K that I got from my friend. I went and bought a first ed base box. And so, hey, I got to open first ed base box with it. And my rationale behind that was you have a 12 out of 15 chance hitting a Zard. And I'm like, oh, I could sell a Zard, go open a box, and then pull another Zard. Infinite money glitch. Not possible. Not real. They're not real, man. And I didn't pull another Zard. So it's very sad.
And then you have people like Charizard King who gets 3 Charizards out of one box, which is just like, I think they all graded 10s too. Just,
don't tell me that. Don't tell me
that. I know he pulled. I know he has pulled 3 Charizards out of one box, but can't confirm the all graded 10s. But I know he's pulled 3 out of 4. But like, yeah, hitting that prime inflection point, you don't want to be that guy who sells too low, but also you want to maximize your value. Because I remember you auctioned that card off and it ended up at 24, which was, I think the market at that point was about 30 for Zard, which is a reason, like $6,000 to high-end collectors is nothing, pennies. But to like people like us, that's a lot of, you can buy a lot of stuff, especially at that time, for like $6,000. And then like so we were at like around 30, I think, 30 for Zard. And then like a couple months or a couple weeks after that, Colors sold his as at a fixed price for $40,000. And then like the community went nuts, right? And I was like, oh my god, Azar just sold for $40,000. So then so you're like, because you didn't hit that inflection point, you're like $16,000, like $16,000, $16,000. But like if you talk about like, if you, let's just say a more recent example, you take like the Lily, one selling for $60,000, and I'm just in my head, I'm like, that price can't hold. Like you can't hold that price. And then the next week later, like one sells for $100,000, $40,000 difference. That's like a 40% bump in price in just a week's time, which actually tells you the market is probably pretty volatile at this point. But like illustration cards, like we talked about a little bit earlier, for a while the Zora illustration cards are really hot, and now we have the Arceus ones that are really hot right now. Then obviously we have Snap Pikas that are really hot. Waifus are really hot. It's such a huge gamble to like, how do you, like, there's no way to know how to maximize your value.
I do hear waifus are pretty hot. I mean,
yeah, it's true. Waifus are pretty hot, and the community is very thirsty.
Clip that. Oh my gosh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up episode 2 of the Next Gen TCG podcast. Once again, we would love to answer your viewer questions, so you can post them on the socials. If you guys have any criticisms, what you like to see, what you don't like to hear about, leave them as well. We will try to fix as much as we can. We are still learning along the way of how to make this podcast better, but Zach and I are constantly trying, right, Zach, to
Dude, I'm so excited to be here. I mean, I think you're like the perfect partner for this. And if you guys want to give some feedback, more than happy. I think just some way to communicate to the hobby every week and talk about the things happening, give our perspective. I think it's gonna be cool. I just can't wait to see where we end up and all the different little things that happen in between. So leave a comment, give us some questions. Let's kind of give you exactly what you want to hear.
I got a haircut. You notice?
I knew it was looking pretty blonde, but just the headset, the hockey.
I got a haircut, and then my wife actually dyed it for me.
Ooh, that's fun. Do you just put your head in a bowl and just let it?
No, it's a lot of sitting and a lot of painting. She literally just sits there and paints my hair with a brush.
Oh my gosh.
And then I have to sit there, and actually burns a lot too. I don't know if you ever dyed your hair. Yeah, obviously you have very natural, beautiful blonde hair. But for us, you have very dark hair. You have to like really go at it with the bleach.